to our leadership lecture. Leaders, leadership, those are two words that are often used interchangeably, but what do they mean? So let's examine this and let's see why we interchange these words and the differing views that are out there. So starting from you, let's go ahead and talk about the actual words leader and leadership. What are these words? What do they mean? Are they the same or are they different?
I think they're different.
Okay.
You can have a bad leader that has someone else lead for him.
Okay. So now we're looking at that these two are actually different. So this and this do not have to be together. So then how would we define this? So then who is the leader? All right, so we're looking at actually a source of power, which is called a legitimate leader. So a leader is, you can look at this in two ways, is somebody that's appointed or emerges from a group. So these actually can be the same. And that is a contemporary definition. That's the kind of definition that you're going to get from our textbook. And when we're talking about, there's an article in 2016 called Defining Leadership. That is one of the perceptions on how to define these two things. They could be the same, but they're not necessarily the same. So, but actually, up until the 1920s, according to the article Defining Leadership, they were the same thing. And so there's a lot of misperceptions about how we get there, and then you start throwing in ethics and morals. And there's even more theories behind that. So when we're looking at this, we're coming into this idea of who makes a leader. Are leaders born or are they made? And up till the 1920s, according to Defining Leadership in 2016, leaders, quote unquote, were born. Okay, so you had to actually be special in order to be a leader. And that was generally accepted in our culture here, and then of course historically, so we can see, let's say, royalty being born into leadership positions. They're born there because they're special, and it could be also those that arose. Maybe they came from some, maybe not a royalty position, but let's say a great warrior. They were actually born that way, and that creates a specialness because of certain characteristics that they have innately in them. So they're saying that certain parts of your personalities create a leader. As time went on, moving into the 50s, they discovered that actually this is an ability. Leadership is an ability which can be developed. And now that's generally accepted, that this can be developed. But there's also other ways to look at leadership, and it's highly debated as to who gets the title, who gets the honor of these two words. And that's when we start bringing in Aristotle's thoughts about ethics, ethos. And a while ago I brought in a philosopher called John Dewey from his work in like 1917, who talked about morality. And so they started to tie in these ideas in order to understand, so who gets the honor of being called a leader? We're looking at just the definitions. Anybody can be the leader. But what is the twist that morality or ethics, what are we looking for as far as in order to have good ethics? What are they supposed to be doing? Can they do whatever they want? So what they're supposed to do, if we start bringing in way back, and Aristotle's thoughts of ethos is you should be raising up the good of everyone, of the group. So it isn't your own self-interest. So there's a lot of debates, and when you go further into, and this is actually Burns in 1969 started to really look into this, is who should be honored with the title of a leader? So should Hitler be honored with that title? And you look at that, and this was obviously not somebody that was doing this for the good of the whole, and that is still a huge debate. Who gets to be honored with that title? So there's two different ways to look at this. If we look at just the straight definitions, a leader is somebody that is appointed or emerged, then that pretty much leaves it open to any kind of outcome. But once we start putting in moral and ethics into this, in rhetoric, then you start looking at what really is leadership. So we can pretty much take off the table that specialness is not a factor in being a leader or in leadership. Okay, but now we need to put other things on the table, is what is our intent for others and how do we bring that about. So there are certain things that are more helpful in actually showing the intent, and so we're going back to Aristotle again, is if you have more of a likeness with others. So if you are, let's say, in a persuasive presentation, you're leading something, then if you show that you are more like the audience and that your intent is good for them, you're going to be more accepted as a leader and more influential. If, on the other hand, you are more aloof or more disconnected and you're spewing out facts and statistics, the audience isn't going to feel connected to you. And so if they can't see that goodwill, it's less likely that an audience would accept you as a leader. So that brings me to my next point, is how do we become leaders? Actually, every single one of you are leaders right now. But in a group, in order to become a leader, you have to have an acceptance from followers. And it doesn't mean that you're like happily accepting the person. You can say, okay, this person is the boss and I don't like the boss. Okay, but you're still calling that person your boss. So you have accepted that person as a follower to be the boss. Up to this point, do these definitions make sense? Okay. Now let's take a look at how actually we can become influential. Because every single one of you in this room has this power, and that's what it is. It's power. So we're going to look at some very, very old, almost 7 decades old, work from French and Rabin in 1958, who identified 5 sources of power that any of us can hold. And there's so much research on this. It dates back to, of course, before their work, but they were the ones that actually put the words into this. And these words are still used. They're mentioned in your textbook. They're mentioned in the business communication textbook as well, and just in a number of different places. So basically, power is the ability to influence others. And if you can see that, that's where these definitions are at, especially when we're talking about the ability, the leadership. So power is the ability to influence another person. Now, if you're going to be graced with the title of a leader, that's a whole different story, but I'm going to kind of put that debate aside for right now, whether that really is a leader or not. We're just going to look at the sources of power, and we'll just assume that it's a leader because that's kind of the common language. But we know that the morality of bringing a group up, that's where a lot of the debates are sparked. Who gets honored to be called a leader? So 5 sources of power: reward, coercive, legitimate, expert, and reverent power. So the first one is reward power, and that is looked at in a number of different ways. And when French and Rabin, when they were looking at this, they were actually studying factory workers. And they looked at reward power very simply as somebody has the ability to reward you with something which can motivate you to do something. And we see that. If you're at work and if your boss can motivate you with pay or a raise or time off, then they have that type of power over you because you're willing to do that. And we work with this all the time. Reward power, you see it here at school. You know, reward power may be, you know, if you work a little harder on an assignment, you get it done early, then you may get out of class a little bit early. So reward power is important, and it is better served, it's more influential if that person is actually able to actually give you the reward. So if something happens and let's say you don't get the time off and you still have to work, that reward power is actually weakened and that person has less power over you than if they're able to consistently reward you. This can also be psychological rewards. So somebody has the ability to make you feel good and you like that and you just need to feel good, that can also help you be, and that's actually tied into reverence as well, that can actually help you do more things. They can actually have more influence over you. Now, a lot of people mistake some coercive and reward power, like they mix those up, but they're very different. They are distinctly different. So coercive power, who knows what the word coercive means? What do you think?
It's kind of like making a trade-off in a way, kind of in a way forcing them, I don't know, offering something that they can't really say no to.
It is. Okay, so that is coercive power. Coercive power is manipulating somebody into doing something. And it is not tied into reward power, even though a lot of people think it is. So for example, if let's say bonuses are being handed out at work for getting a certain quota, somebody may think that it's coercion that they aren't able to make the bonus. That's actually reward power that hasn't been awarded, and that strengthens it if you do exactly what you say you're going to do with reward power. Even though there may be a perception from people in the group that, you know, oh, that's not fair. You know, I worked just as hard as anybody else. I didn't make the quota. I was just this far away from it. But that's not coercive. It's when you are manipulating or you're forcing somebody to do something that they may not want to do. And this has, of course, a lot of problems in leadership. We talked about groupthink not too long ago, about how there can be a lot of coercion, let's say, with leaders. I think we talked about the example of Wells Fargo in this class, about how leaders can pressure people to do things that they shouldn't do, that are illegal, that are manipulative, but their jobs are on the line and they really can't afford to lose their jobs. That's a problem. That's coercive power. Coercive power comes in 3 different categories. One is, by the way, how you interact. So it can be abusive in the interpersonal relationships. The next thing can be social exclusion, which is very difficult to take. And then the last one is physical intimidation. So all of those are issues with coercive power. There's very few examples of where this is a good idea. So for example, if you're talking about somebody with criminal intent, that the coercive power would be maybe your only option. Coercive power can be used, let's say in life or death situations. An ER situation could be an example of where that might be the best way to get the results. But coercive power overall, it's a bad idea. This is not where we want to go. Now, coercive power, of course, comes from leaders, and it's a big problem when it comes from leaders, but it's also something that comes from peers as well, and this one becomes very tricky. In the example from the 1958 factory workers, they had a group of people, and they were iron pressers, so they would press clothes, pajamas, in the factory. there was a lady that was particularly fast at pressing the fabric, so she was, or the pajamas, so she was able to actually do her job really well naturally, so she had a natural aptitude for this. The people that she worked with were very jealous, and so they basically started to harass her. What she did is she just stopped doing as well. And so that pressure just limited her in actually being as good as she could have been. And due to the circumstances of the factory, a group of people went to go work at a different place. And then as soon as she was in a new environment where people were being coercive towards her, she was able to excel way beyond what they thought she could do. They knew there was a problem. And that was with adults. When we look at where we see this is your contemporary bullying. That's exactly what it is. And you look at the insults that happen, the physical intimidation and the social exclusion, and once thought as an adolescence problem, now we realize this happens in colleges, this happens in working environments. So, I mean, those are the effects of coercion. One of the main problems, and some scholars are putting this together, schools that allow corporal punishments may be one of the effects of not learning proper social skills. Just seeing that, the only way how to keep something in line is, the beatings or the coercion, and then they get into these other environments, and that's what they know what works. So how do we fix this type of power? This is really powerful, and that's the problem. It gets out of hand very quickly. What do you think are the ways that we can fix coercive power, that we can damper it, that we can make the effects not as profound?
Or safety is like people watching the leadership.
Yep, that's exactly what the research said. So this is where we come back to this over here. One of the studies that I looked at, and I have to see which one it was, because I've been looking at just so many. I believe this one was Rarish in 2012. I think that's where that study came from. Said that in order to, and they were looking at higher education, because that's where a lot of my focus is at, that when resources were scarce, so for example, overworked employees, administrators, teachers, when they did not have a lot of extra time, they weren't able to see or do anything when they saw bullying happening. Of course, the more scary thing is when it's the adults that are bullying. It doesn't happen as often as peer-to-peer bullying, but it's still there. So actually investing in not allowing people to be overworked. If you're in that position, then you'll have to make sure that you use that legitimate authority to, and the purpose that it's supposed to, in order to keep things safe for others. So legitimate authority is what we're talking about. This over here, a person is appointed a leader, or they are the leader, they are the boss, they are the person that runs the meeting. And so that can, of course, be somebody that emerges, but a lot of times it is the manager, the boss, the CEO, the person in the group that's coordinating things. That's what legitimate leadership means. And there's a number of different ways that you can get legitimate leadership, as you are right here. So let's think about it. How do we get to be that person that people look at and say, oh yeah, that's our leader. That's our boss. Think of your work. How many times are you bled something? What has caused that? And what is it about them that's so, and I'm going to use the word special, but I don't mean like specialness as being born that way. What makes them so special? So that is one way to earn legitimate leadership, is their skill set in something. So this is where we go into expert power. And this is something that you're working at as college students. You're gaining knowledge in something that not everybody has. And that knowledge is what actually puts you in that position. So if there are minimal requirements for a position, and it says that, for example, in education, you have to have a degree in this field, then you are going to have legitimate power for that expertise in that area. So that is one way. Or just being in a place for long enough. Seniority is a type of legitimate or expert power. We talked about cultures in here, and sometimes in families, just being older creates that expert power, and then that increases their legitimacy in a leadership position. So we're all a part of this. We're interwoven in this, and we accept it as followers. We influence it as leaders ourselves. And then these two are so closely tied to each other. So reverent power, that is, or who knows what reverent power is, instead of me just giving it away. Anybody know that word? Oh, let me ask you something. Have you ever done anything for anybody just because you liked them? That's reverent power. And that's how, and this is a full circle now. So we go back to Aristotle's thoughts on that likeness that we feel with another person. So if somebody thinks that you're like them, then you have goodwill for them. You're actually establishing this right here. So we've actually just come to a full circle on how power, how these are all interwoven with each other. Again, you can't have that influence over others unless you accept them as a leader. You can grumpily accept them as a leader, but the only way you can do this in a group is if there's some type of cooperation with followers. Okay. Now we've defined leaders and leadership. We've taken a look at how morals and ethics affect our perception of this, and especially the scholars. And then we've looked at how we actually get power. Where does power come from? So that gives us all something to think about here. Do you have any questions so far? You want a drink of water?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry about all that.
No, it's okay.
I just can't help. I got a little tickle in my throat.
That's okay. I'll do a pause here.
Thank you.
Poor kid, he sounds so miserable.